Hi there my friends, welcome to my YouTube channel. Today I'm working Derwent Inktense on a piece of cold press watercolour paper. It's £140 in weight. I haven't pre-stretched it, I've just taped it down to a board, popped a little sketch on there and off we go. So at the moment I'm working with the Inktense pans. Derwent did send me these pans to have a play with and maybe do a review later on, so I didn't pay for these or the Inktense pencils that you'll see later on in the video. I am a Derwent ambassador, so they do send me products as they arrive. Okay, so in each little area at the moment I'm adding water and then I'm just dropping in some pigment, so that's the wet in wet technique. The best thing about the Inktense products is that they are permanent when dry. It does mean that they're a little harder to lift. If you put something down and you don't want it to be there, you've pretty much got to go in straight the way and lift it back out, because once it's dry it's there for good. But on the plus side, that does mean you can layer and layer and layer, lots of layers, lots of glazing can be used, glazing techniques where you're tinting the colour below. So they really are fun to work with, and it's a nice fast medium to work with too. I could have done this painted just as easily with watercolour, because the same techniques and the same methods do apply to both. And as you can see, I've popped the finished painting up in the top left hand corner there for you to see where I was aiming for. I had a reference image for the robin, and that's about it really. So making it up as I was going along, which is fun. This was just a fun piece. I just sat down, just wanted to play, wanted to relax. I'm sure you all know what that feels like when you get your art products out and no pressure, just put a podcast on or YouTube or the radio or something like that, or some music in the background and just have a play. It's so relaxing. So there you go, building up the pigment. So just using limited colour palette at the moment for the background, because I want this to be all about the bird and obviously the lantern and less about the background. Just to let you know that as you can see me go through the background, creating a background, I dried it off with a hairdryer and then I did it 2 more times. So the background was put in 3 times in all. I haven't shown all of that in this video because it's just a rinse and repeat. It's just the same thing, and it's just to build up that intensity. Sorry, but I'm going behind the reference image there, but it's just the same. Adding water first, then adding pigment on top, dropping the pigment in and letting the pigment just do its own thing, pretty much how you would if you were using watercolours. So these Inktense pans and pencils that you'll see later on, they are light fast in their dry form, but once you add water, the light fast, it's a bit iffy then. They probably are light fast, but I wouldn't go as far to say I'm definitely sure that they are, because as far as I'm aware, Derwent have the same sort of thought ideas as well. Who knows how much water someone's going to add to these pigments, and that might alter how light fast they're going to be in years to come. But I must admit, the paintings that I have done with the Inktense, and they're hanging in the house and they've been sold to clients who have kept me informed, none of them have faded. So not sure. So keep an open mind about the light fastness of the Inktense pigments once water's added. But they are matte when they dry, which is great if you want to photograph your work and then make prints or cards and things like that. So you could make your money back by producing things like that if you don't want to sell your original artworks because of the light fast issues. Well, I shouldn't say issues, but the light fast question mark. Okay, so moving on, I want to keep it quite light around the lantern itself. So I'm making the washes lighter in tone, so more water, less pigment. Just going quite steadily around the bird and around the lamp, because as I said, if you get this pigment anywhere, it's pretty much there to stay. And the last thing I want are purples going across anything where I don't want them to be. I hope everyone's keeping well. It's just a week till Christmas now, Christmas 2023. I hope everybody's gearing up for a relaxing festive time. If you celebrate Christmas, I hope you're getting some time off work and are able to see family and friends. And keep safe, everybody, and I hope you all have a wonderful time. And I hope I've timed this right, so it might give you an idea of painting a little Christmas card for somebody or something like that. You've still got time, you've got a week, there's always time for art. So just playing with those pigments there, and there you can see I've added one whole background coat. Now I'm just going in, adding water to the side of the lamp, adding a little bit of yellow, keeping in mind where because the light is going to be coming from that lamp and I don't want to get too dark. And there you go. So that was 3 layers. So that background was completed in three layers. And if you can see to the left hand side of the lamp, there is a little bit of a hard line there. When you're working with Inktense, hard line between the yellow and the purple above it, a little bit of a hard line. When you're working with Inktense, excuse me, because it is a stain, they are staining colours, they stain your paper, that's why they won't lift. Hard lines, you've got to work quick to avoid. Okay, so you've got to work quickly to avoid hard lines, and I didn't quite catch that area quick enough, but it's fine. It all sort of blends in and looks okay in the finished painting. And this was just a play piece, and I just happened to have the camcorder running, so hey ho, nothing lost there. And I could have gone on with more layers of yellows using the stronger pigments and covered up that hard line, but to be quite honest, you know, it's a little tiny painting, just a play piece, experimental piece, I guess. And I'm happy with the outcome, so that's all that matters. So using 3 of the Inktense pencils now and working wet into wet. Just adding a bit of pigment, just want to get that white paper covered up to begin with in the initial layers. Going in with I think that's a number 6 Rosemary and Co brush. One of my favourite watercolour brushes, the Rosemary and Co. And this is, I can't remember which series it is, I'll pop it in the description below, but it's my favourite watercolour brush. Comes out for gouache, comes out for watercolour, and obviously comes out for Inktense. You can use all of your watercolour brushes for Inktense, but if you've got brushes that are, say, a white bristle, and you want to keep them looking pristine, don't use them with Inktense, because the Inktense will stain the hairs and bristles of your brushes. Just a little warning then, if you're precious about your pristine looking brushes, which I'm not. They're there to do a job, they're a tool. Okay. And as you'll see during the painting, I move that board around constantly. For those who've known me for a long time, you'll know that I had rotator cuff muscle problems in my shoulder, and so I make life easy for myself now, and I rotate my work as needed, so I'm always in a comfortable position. I'm actually working flat doing this painting. I do lift the board up at an angle later on in the painting when I'm working on the robin, you'll see that. That's just to make sure the paint is moving in the direction I want it to move. But for the most part for this piece, I just work flat. Other times I'll be working standing up at an easel, so it's either one or the other. But for this, I needed the washes to go on flat, so I wanted the board flat. Simple as that. So as you can see, you need, with the pencils, you need such a tiny amount of pigment scribbling off onto something rough. This is a textured palette by Cardinal, and it's because of the texture of it, it's ideal for scribbling on some pigment and then adding water and lifting it off with a brush. Or you can you could get a normal plastic palette and go over it with a piece of rough sandpaper, rinse it off under the tap, and then you'll have that rough texture on a piece of plastic to do the same technique as this. But if you do make any rough marks on a plastic palette, just be aware that it will stain from there on. The colours will penetrate the plastic and stain it, but that doesn't worry me either. Oh, look at my weird reflection in the metal part. Ooh, it's like one of those magic mirrors at the fair. Okay, so moving on, adding a little bit of yellow. Nice light washes now. So anywhere where I want the light to be radiating from that lantern, I need to go on very lightly with the colours. So I go on with a little bit of yellow, and while it's still wet, dab off in the middle. That's what I did with the two metal bits running down the front of the lantern. I went over them with a very light wash and then lifted off some of the pigment with a tissue, just retaining that luminosity right in the middle of the lantern itself. Now I've used a couple of other pencils, an orange and a darker yellow, doing exactly the same thing, but now I'll keep that pigment just to the top and bottom of the lantern window. So top, bottom, add a little bit of water. Oh, now I'm going in with a little bit more pigment. But I don't want it right in that middle, so straight in with the tissue, and there you go. And then rinse and repeat in the other two little windows, and just keep dabbing the middle section just to maintain the lighter pigment in the middle. There you go. It's really, really simple. And when I started this painting, I didn't know how I was going to approach the lantern. So it's just one of those things you figure out as you go along. And every painting is different. I've been painting since I was sort of 4, and I'm 57 now. And it's a continuous learning curve. And that's what makes it fun. So leaving the lantern alone for now, letting all of that. Oh no, I'm going in with the darks. I thought I was going into the robin then. Oh. Okay, so adding the same again. So this is the same technique I used to apply the yellow. Just going in with a little bit of pigment. I'm assuming I'll go top and bottom, and then lifting it out in the middle if it goes too far down. And by using quite a bit of water, they're lifting the board there so that the pigments flow in the correct direction. So it is quite controllable. As I said, you could do exactly the same thing just using watercolour. And what you're not seeing is between each layer, I am drying this off completely with a hairdryer, just to make sure that when I go on top with anything else, everything underneath is dry. So just drag that orange pigment down over the two metal pieces of the lantern, just to create a warmth in the metal. It's really simple. And always keeping a piece of tissue in one hand when I'm working with watercolours or Inktense or even acrylics. There you go. And that's why. Okay, so we're going over to the fir tree, the spruce. I'm assuming it's some species of spruce. And going in just with the dark branches, keeping everything light, because I can always go darker. It's a little bit more trickier to go lighter though with Inktense, unless you want to start going into mixed media, like you could add gouache on top of this, or you could add coloured pencil on top of this, but keeping everything light layers and building up. And then if you do make a mistake and you've only gone in lightly, it would be easier to disguise. The snow falling that you can see on the finished painting, that was just done right at the end, which you'll see, that is in the video, and that's just the splatter technique using a little bit of white gouache and drying off with a hairdryer as well, and it works really well with the Inktense as an underpainting. But as I said, all of this could have been achieved just as easily with watercolour. So got some of the branches in. I'd obviously got fed up of doing the branches, so I do flip from part to part when I'm painting. I don't stick in one corner and then work my way methodically across a painting. I like it to be an enjoyable activity. It's my job after all, and I'm doing it a lot of the time. I want to be comfortable. I want to be making the most of my time, and I want it to be enjoyable. So I decided to go over and start on some of the fir tree needles, and it's just a case, all I did had in mind that I would put a lighter colour down, so a lighter green down, and then I'd build up glazes over the top of this to create shadows on the fir tree. And as you're putting glazes on to create shadows, you're also enhancing the colours, the amount of colours where you've already put your initial green. So this is just a guideline really, and everything else will be worked on top of this. Where I want the snow to be really white, I'm actually not going to be applying any paint to that. I'm going to be very careful that I retain the white of the paper. Now you could mask it out, but I mean it's time consuming, and really for this a piece this size, it's really easy to just work around the areas where you don't want any paint. So carrying on, just popping that in with the Rosemary & Co. number 6. Lovely little paintbrush. Got a couple of these ones and they keep their tips so fine. I've got another one, but I've never had to use it, and I've had this brush must be going on for about 6 years, I guess, 6 or 7 years, and I've got the other one just as a backup, just in case. But as I said, not needed to use it yet. I have a little pot on near my painting area with all my brushes in, watercolour brushes that I use most often, and then I have a display set at the back of me with other watercolour brushes that I reach for rarely. So I am going to do a studio tour. Now I'm in the new studio and people have been requesting that, so that will be coming hopefully first couple of weeks of the new year, hopefully. And then I'll show you what I have in my studio, how I store things. Yeah, little nosy round. Just going in, making sure that the needles are, these little leaves are pointing in the right direction for each branch. If you're working off a reference image for this, I wouldn't suggest going needle for needle, as long as everything's moving in the right direction. You're never going to have your reference image hanging next to your painting, so just keep that in mind. Excuse me. Yeah, I could have edited all of this out, showed you a little bit, but it gives you a rough idea of how I approach things, and leaving gaps. So not doing all of the needles connected to a main stem. I am doing some where they seem to be floating in space, and that is because they're going to be surrounded by snow. So it's just the tip of the leaf poking through. Now I've mixed up a lighter wash, which is, I'm classing it as a glaze because I'm now going over the colours, and it's just tinting whatever is beneath it. So whether that's white paper, it's tinting it. Whether that's the green foliage I've already applied, it's tinting that. And with the foliage, because I've left gaps between the little needles, whatever colour I put on top is going to be tinting the paper between the needles and tinting the needles. So straight away you're getting differences in colour and differences in value. And value is just how light or dark something is, that's all. So going in with a darker value there, because that's going to be in shade. You can see that in the finished painting. That is the robins creating a little shadow there on that one. And going in even darker So just keep building this up. This is all going wet into wet, so I pre-wet the area first with clean water, make sure your brush is clean, and then just add in the pigments as I go along. And at this point you could add more leaves. You could even, you know, go in with your pencils then once it's dry. You could go in with coloured pencils, you can go on top of this with gouache, anything like that. So wetted the area first, going in with some browns. And this is still the pencils. The rest of the painting, apart from the speckly snow at the end, is just the Inktense pencils. So wetting the area again. Now, got to keep in mind that I want the light of the lantern to be hitting that side of the robin, so making sure I'm going in with light colours and hues there. And going into the reds and the darks towards the left of the bird, where it would be more shadowed areas. That's wet on dry now, pulling the pigment down towards the edge of those feathers there. Just there, wet onto dry. So I haven't pre-wet that area else it would just blend straight out. It would feather out. No pun intended with the words feather out. A little bit of shadowing round the back of the head. Again, just keep in my mind where the light is. And I had my head over. I had to get, because it's such a small painting, I had to get right over the top of the painting to apply the eye. But I just went in with blue and very dark brown and left some area for the highlight. So it was nice and easy. Going on with darker tones now. Working wet in wet. That's the lovely thing about Inktense, is you can go wet on wet over a dried area with no fear of anything lifting back up, which isn't the case always with watercolours. Sorry about that. Going in darker, you can really build the intensity up on. These pigments look very, very dull when they're dry. So if you look at the pans or look at the pencils, they all look quite dull. But you add water to them and they are so vibrant. So all of my water-soluble mediums, I always swatch them out because they look so different wet to when they're dry. So I've got a swatch sheet in front of me and I look at that before choosing my colours. Some of the colours I know because I've used them often, but if it's a colour I'm wanting to mix and I'm not quite sure because I haven't used it before, I'll look at my swatch sheet. And the pans, the Inktense pans, the Inktense blocks and the Inktense pencils are all interchangeable. They're all the same pigment but in a different format, so that you can mix and match them. They're all open stock, which means you can buy them all open, you know, one pencil or one pan or one block. They are a dream to work with. And you can work them on fabrics as well as paper and card. You could work them on cardstock, Bristol board, anything like that. But they really come into their own on watercolour paper. Beautiful. I've yet to try them on canvas, so that's on my to-do list for the new year. Okay, just drying everything off, making sure it's really bone dry before going on with my next layers. Doesn't take long, just a couple of minutes to dry. And then just adding water there so I can start adding shadows. Using purples, lilacs for the shadows. I'd never suggest using black. Black's very flat, even if you mix it with something else, which I do suggest if you're using it in other parts of your painting, to never use it on its own. But I never use black in a shadowed area. It can look very, very dull and odd. And if you're using black and it happens to butt up to anything yellow, you're very likely to get a dirty green colour, and that's not very nice in any painting at all. So just going on with different pigments, using some yellow so that the feathers are reflecting light from the lamp, and lilacs and purples. And once this layer was dry, I went over it again. I think there was possibly 2 or 3 layers for this part of the body of the bird, just darkening everything off. Keeping it simple. It's just lovely, isn't it, watching the paint do its own thing in a wetted area. I'm that relaxed, I'd even got my elbow leaning on the table to the left. Oh, it's just such a relaxing painting to do. I really enjoyed this one. I don't know if you can see that. I've left a very thin white line running down the right hand side of the bird, and leaving that little bit of paper just peeking through just adds to the feeling of the light hitting the bird. You know, I could have gone in at the end and added that with gouache or a white pencil. I know some people like to use white gel pens, but I'm not that keen on those. I'd rather use paint if possible. Just darkening everything up, creating more shadows. These are the final touches now. You know, you keep standing back. If you're unsure, go away, let your painting dry naturally, make a tea or a coffee or something, and then come back to it with fresh eyes, even if that's the next day, and have a look and see what your painting needs. Now, I've used a little bit of transparent paper to mask out the bird so it's not stuck on the bird. I've just cut round, laid it very gently on top of the bird before I apply some background speckles with a toothbrush. That's watered down gouache in that little pot. Then once I've got enough in the background and I want bigger spots, I go on with a brush because I need some of that snow falling in front of the robin. That's why I've now removed the little piece of masking. And if any of those little droplets hit anywhere where I didn't want them, I could quickly go in with a tissue and lift them up because the pigment underneath is permanent. So just steadying my arm there on my hand so I don't have to move the board around, and just enhancing some of the snowy parts, and that's it, it's done. So I hope you've enjoyed today's video. I hope you all have a fantastic Christmas. Thank you for supporting me on YouTube this past year and all your lovely comments. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you soon. Bye bye. Hi there my friends, welcome back to my channel. Hope you're all keeping well. Today I'm going to be working on this stylised little red-eyed tree frog on a bauble in pastel. It's a little image that I created digitally a couple of years ago, and then last week I decided I'd like to create it in pastel. So I'm working on Clairefontaine pastel matte paper. I've cut a piece from a larger sheet and taped it to the back of a wooden panel. I then applied a mask to mask out where the frog and the bauble goes, and it's the masking film by Frisket. And now I'm applying the background using the pan pastels. So it's a soft pastel in little pans. They look like makeup compacts. You can buy them singly or you can buy them in sets, and then you can buy these little trays for them to sit in as extras, although I do believe you get the trays with the complete set. I'm not sure. And I'm applying these at the moment just with a makeup sponge, just from, if you're in America it'd be the Dollar Tree, but we call it Poundland over here, and they're just the really cheap foam makeup applicators, and they work fine for when you're wanting to cover larger areas. So you can apply them with different things like soft tools which look like palette knives. You'll see one later in the video. They come in different shapes and they have little removable foam socks on the end, but for an area this big I just use the makeup sponges. Pan Pastel do actually make sponges, but for how much I use them they're a little bit overpriced for me, and I just can get away with using these instead. Horses for courses, whatever whatever works, whatever makes my life easier and makes the parts of the project like this go a little bit quicker. So in my head I know I want the right hand side to go darker because it's where the fir tree would be, and leaving the left hand side a little bit lighter. So for me, I do like to mask out the actual subject itself when I'm doing a messy background like this. If I was to draw the subject, the frog and the bauble, onto the paper to begin with, I would have to be so careful not to let too much of the background colours overlap the subject, because then I've either got to go in and lift them out with a putty rubber, or I've got to work my pastel layers over the background area that's leaked into where the subject is. For me, just to save time, I just like to get my drawing down onto a different piece of paper, using a light box, trace it onto a piece of masking paper, cut the mask out, stick the mask down, and now I can just relax, get the background in, and not have to worry about dirtying the area or contaminating the area where the actual subject is going to go. When I remove that frisket, I know that the paper underneath will be pristine, it'll be lovely and clean, and then I can go ahead, add the sketch to it, you know, of all the details that I want into the drawing of that area, and then apply pastel and not have to worry about anything else. So I've swiveled the board round, obviously you can see, and it's simply so I'm not reaching over. Years ago I did have problems with the rotator cuff muscles in my shoulder because of doing artwork every day. I was standing at an easel for a long time back then. So now, to make things easy for me, for comfort, I just swivel the board. So in my head I know where I want these fir twigs to go. These pine twigs, I don't think you call them branches because they're very small, but I might skip between the word twig and branch. And so I just did a ghost line, so that's where I pull the pencil in the direction I want something to go, but I don't actually touch the paper. I'm just getting a little bit of muscle memory in there just so I know what I'm doing moving forward. Grabbing a piece of glassine. If you don't know what this is, it was originally used as butcher's paper, and it's a non-transferable paper, a little bit like tracing paper, but nothing sticks to it. So I can use a piece of this to rest my hand on without the fear of it picking up and smudging any of the pastel underneath. So the glassine I use is also by Clairefontaine, but there are many different makes and they're probably all the same. I just like Clairefontaine because I know it works, it doesn't pick up anything, and it's acid free, so it's not going to damage anything, any of the surfaces you're actually working on. So I've blocked in all of where I want the background for stems to go. Oh, we've got twigs, branches and stems now. And now I'm going on with the second coat. So building up some darks in there just to get that stem in. I can still go over it with pastels. You can work dark to light or light to dark. Putting a few highlighted browns in there as well, give it a bit of texture. So the tooth of Clairefontaine pastel matte paper takes lots and lots of layers of pastel, and personally I've never got to the point where the paper's been saturated and won't take any more. Put in a little bit of shadow in there, and obviously the picture at the top right hand corner of the screen, that is this pastel painting finished, just so you can see where I was going. So working up in lighter areas now. So, and in these fir stems, twigs, branches, I did use a mixture of warm greens and cool greens just to give it a little bit more of an oomph effect. I wouldn't say wow factor, but it just gave it more realism. I don't know why I wanted realism when I'm looking at a frog with a Santa hat on, but there you go. So I work the rest of the branches in the same way, building from dark to light, varying the warm greens and cool greens, just to give it a little bit more interest. Back on with some glassine, and now I sketched in the rest of the details now on the little frog and bauble. I could begin by adding colour. So I like to work from the back of a painting to the forefront of a painting. And because this eye is behind his face, or what you can see of his face, and it's behind the bauble hanging from his hat, I wanted to get that eye in first. That way anything added actually overhangs that area that I've just worked on, and it stops there being any halos. This is another reason why I like to add a mask to the actual subject when I'm putting a background in. If the mask wasn't there, I could end up with a halo of around the subject where I've tried to push colour up towards the subject but try not to overlap it. I'd rather get around that just by using a mask. So building up some darks in the area right next to his face, and then building the lights on top. Very forgiving medium pastel is. And I did use cool reds and warm reds, and even an orangey, really orangey red in the eyes. So the cool reds would be where the shadowed areas are, and the warmer reds and this orange where the light's actually hitting the eye of the frog. And I'm blending it all in using a blending stump, paper blending stump. This is actually the 4th attempt to record the voiceover, because we have a pup named Honey. I'm not going to say her name out loud too much because she's fast asleep at the minute, but she's just had zoomies running around right in the middle of recording a voiceover, and then she decided to get squeaky toys out too, so that was a no-go. So yeah, this is the 4th time today doing the voiceover, so if I repeat myself I do apologise. So back in with the blending stump again, just making sure everything's blended together, and by blending it this way you're actually pushing, gently pushing the pastel pigments into the tooth of the paper, and that allows you to apply more if you need to. So onto the hat. Now I just didn't want a cone, cone shaped Santa hat sitting on top of his head. I wanted something with a little bit of character, so I drew this little floppy hat. And in my original design, the floppy hat had a very intricate bauble on it with stars and all different things. No, when you work in this small you just can't do that. Well, you probably could, but that would have been lost in the end project. So yeah, simple bauble but a floppy hat. And in the folds of the hat I wanted to include shadows to make it look at least a little bit realistic. And again, as with the eye, I worked with cool reds and warm reds. So there's like a burgundy colour I used for the initial shadow areas. There you go, I'm using a Watercolour orange, reddish orange, where the light would be hitting it, and then I use the burgundy and cool reds where the shadowed areas are. And when I'm talking about a warm red versus a cool red, all you need to do is just look at, if you're unsure, look at a colour wheel, and if a red is leaning more towards purple, then it's a cool red. If it's leaning more towards orange, then it's a warm red. And the same goes for yellows. If they're leaning more towards green, they're a cool yellow. If they're leaning more towards orange, they're a warm yellow. And blues as well. So just take a look at a colour wheel if you're unsure, and you can pick those up for just a couple of pounds. They are quite cheap. Or you can look online, and there'll be digital ones online that you could probably download just to give you a rough idea. So blending in with the paper stump, And if there's any hard lines you actually want to keep, then put them in afterwards, because each time you blend, you're more than likely going to blend the harsh lines away. So I did pop the bauble in off screen, I guess, without the camera running, because my head was literally right over the project, because it's so small. And all I did was added a couple of warm yellows and a little bit of burgundy for the shaded area. Okay, so onto the frog head. So again, I'm working from my imagination and the digital project that I did a couple of years ago, and it's all really sort of made up, but I can remember when I was sketching digitally, I was looking at quite a few different reference images of red-haired tree frogs, so I got a rough idea of anatomy, but apart from that, yeah, I was just having fun, which you're allowed to do. That's what art is all about, having fun. So building up the base layers, it looks really scruffy, doesn't it? Until, I mean, this is an ugly stage when you're doing these base coat layers. You're just getting some pigment down. You're thinking to yourself, well, at least I am, where do I want my lights? Where do I want my darks? Which areas will be in shade or in shadow, and which areas will be feeling some warmth, maybe from surrounding lights or an overhead light, or if we were outside and doing a subject that was outside, it'd be from the sun, all different things like that. So once you've got those sort of mapped out in your head, you can map them out on paper. Better to go that way round than the other way round. Even though pastel is forgiving, you don't want to make too many misadventures on the base coat layer, because you are going to have to cover them up, and every time you cover something up, you're adding a layer of pastel to the paper, and that decreases the amount of layers you're going to be able to put down after that. But go lightly, make sure your layers go on lightly, and you should be able to get more layers than you realise onto this paper. Papers like Inktense by Canson and things like that. I know Daler Rowney does a pastel paper as well. Less layers, really, is all I can say. That you can't get as many layers on that kind of paper. It's not designed to take lots and lots and lots of layers, whereas the Clairefontaine pastel matte paper does. That's what it's designed to do, and it 100% can't knock it. So this paper stump is a rolled up piece of paper. It's like a spiraled piece of paper, and I don't think I'll be using them again, although they come to a nice point and you can get into some more details. It started going in on itself because it's hollow. The point started moving backwards, and it was like, oh crumbs. So I was getting a pair of tweezers and I was pulling the end back out, but it did its job. But yeah, it will be resigned to if I have to use it, I will kind of draw. Okay, onto the hat. So we've got base coat layers on the frog. So moving on to the hat, let's get some reflected colours onto this. So when we think of, I was thinking then, my fingers were tapping. When we think of something that's white, it's never actually white, not just white. White's really reflective, so it'll be reflecting colours around it. So some shadowing from the hat, so some burgundies, reds and oranges, maybe some green from the frog. It'll be reflecting a little bit of that. So just keep that in mind. Whenever you're creating something with white in it, the white will be reflective. All colours are reflective to a certain extent. It just really stands out even more when it's something that's white. So gently blending those colours in, because don't forget this is the base coat and we can put white on top. When it comes to white and black, less is always more. A little bit of red going in there, and that was a cool red, and again just blending it. When you're blending something with hair, fur, feathers, scales, anything like that, make sure you're blending your base coat layers in the direction which the finished details are going to go. So if you're doing a cat or a dog and you're popping in your base coat layers, make sure you're blending them in the direction that the fur will sit on the finished project. That way, if when you look at the finished project, if you can see any of the base coats, that it'll all be laying in the correct direction and it won't look amiss. So don't just go in there and scribble your base coats. Make sure you're doing it thinking about what the end result's going to look like too. So just add in some white in there, but not covering up everything that had already gone on, and just gently pressing that white back into the tooth of the paper. And I do come back and fiddle with the hat later and add a little bit of shadow, but that's good so far. A little bit more white. And it just gives it, yeah, I just like that hat. It just, yeah, it works. It works for me. I do go, yeah, happy with that, thumbs up. I do go back later and just increase the shadow of the folds in the hat. But yeah, apart from that, that hat's as good as done. Now increasing some of the darker areas of the frog's face and add in the eye. And that was that part of the frog finished. I'll go in and add his nostrils later and fiddle around with the contrast a little bit, but apart from that, it's good. When I worked the main eye, the actual eye that's facing us, I just left a little round dot of white paper, and then right at the end just popped a little bit of white pastel in there and just put a few little strokes out to represent a star shape. Now, because I haven't got an actual reference image to work from, I did play with quite a few colours on the underneath here of his throat. I didn't know, would it be reflected? Well, it probably would be reflecting some of the red from the bauble. I did try that and it just didn't look right. So it's reflecting a tiny little bit of burgundy, but that's all. Whereas the bauble between his two front feet is actually reflecting a little bit of his colour, but I didn't do it very much vice versa. So going on now with some different greens and blues, base coat layers, getting them all filled in. It's just a case of getting rid of the white of the paper, which can be really off-putting, to be honest. And I just wanted colour on there. I wanted to get on with this. I ended up working on it for 3 days in all. Not 3 days total, but a few hours each day for 3 days. And I just wanted it finished and out of the way so I could get the video edited and get this voiceover done and get it posted out to you before Christmas. So just popping that knee in the back there and making a point to not lose the dividing line between his front leg and his back leg, the knee of his back leg. Putting little highlights on the toes just so in my mind I can keep in mind where the highlights are going to be. And just getting some base coat on his little toes. Fun, really fun subject to do. Yes, I did want to get to the end of it, but I did have fun creating it at the same time. In with a blending stump. Just gently blending the pigment into the tooth of the paper again. Cleaning it off on a tissue before going on to a different coloured area. Now that leg, or the two legs that I'm working on at the minute, because they're sitting behind the throat area, I've got to make sure that I get those in before the throat area is finished, because the throat area is sitting on top of those legs. Blending all that colour out. I do end up adding a few more blues to the underneath of his throat and less of the burgundy looking colour. Choosing colours and then coming in with this. So there would be a shadow there, but also using this colour to separate the back leg, the knee of the back leg, from the front leg. So just using that contrast there. One for coloration as well, because they do have that sort of colour on the inside of their legs, but also using it to my advantage to be able to separate the two legs without drawing a line, a dividing line. Because even though this is a stylized piece, I didn't want it an outlined piece like a cartoon. I wanted it to be sort of real looking. I mean, who wouldn't want a little red-eyed tree frog sitting in their Christmas tree wearing a Santa hat? Again, tiny little circles, letting the paper pick up the pigment and then gently blending it. Now, not blending it so much that you lose it, because you can blend, especially if you're pushing, if you keep blending, it will just mix with the colour that you've already applied. The two colours will just mix together and then you will lose the effect. So always light-handed with pastel pencils. And as you can see there, did the same to two front legs, but I've left his feet because I do need to get that bauble in first, because obviously the bauble is sitting behind, well, underneath the feet of the frog, so the bauble's got to come next and then the feet. So I didn't know whether to film this part or keep it in the video, because it is so straightforward. There's just a few colours of burgundy onto this thread that's holding the bauble in the tree, and then just a little pattern on top, but I thought I'd leave it in. It's only sort of a couple of minutes worth of video. So again, going on with a slightly different tone underneath, where the shadow would be cast underneath the ribbon. Again with paper stump, you can see there it's a hollow paper stump. This is the one where the tip kept disappearing. And just blending it in, taking it right up to that edge. I didn't go right up to the edge with the pencil itself because I didn't want to overlap and make it even wider. And now on with a little bit of a pattern. Sorry about my hair getting in the way, but I was having to lean quite into the painting to make sure I wasn't going over the edges. And a just little made up pattern on this area. And this is a Watercolour. I don't know how you pronounce, I don't know if it's Watercolour or Watercolour, but they're available open stock, which means you can buy 1 or 5 or whatever, or you can buy them in sets. The same as the Cardinal, they're available open stock, or you can buy them in sets. And both work extremely well, and they work extremely well together as well. These are of a slightly harder lead than the Cardinal, so I'm not blending there with my finger, I was just patting it down, and it just softens the effect. It just pushes the pigment slightly into the texture of the paper and softens the effect. And by not wiping the lighter pigment off, I enable it to carry a little bit of the dark pigment from underneath. And yeah, that's it. So popping in this highlight onto the bauble and the highlight there, just so I don't lose them. That's, I know where I want them. And then starts the humongous job, which turned out to be 4 whole layers to build up enough vibrancy on this bauble. Didn't think I would need to put in 4 layers. Now if it was a bauble with nothing on it, I could have used the soft pastels, but because of these little intricate toes, yeah, I thought I'd do it all with pastel pencil. It won't take long. 4 layers later, oh crumbs. But I did enjoy it, and it enabled me again to mess around with cool reds and warm reds, golden yellows, and yeah, because this little bauble would be sitting in a tree surrounded probably by other little baubles and hopefully some Christmas tree lights too. So it would have quite a few reflections. Now it's a matte ball. I did make sure I didn't do a glossy looking ball, else I would have had to literally put in all of the different reflections that you see in a glossy item. A shiny item would have reflected far more details than a matte bauble would. So yeah, good thinking there. That would have been a lot of work for this little tiny painting. So going on now, building up the base layer. Lots of tiny little circles going round and round. I didn't want too many sort of scratchy lines, although they do blend out fairly well, especially when you realise you've got to put 4 layers on instead of just a couple. But still wanted to keep it soft, and by going round and round in little circles I can transition quite easily from one colour to the next. And then when you go into blend, they just blend together seamlessly. So in my head I'm thinking, where can I have a couple of darker areas on the bauble where the light's probably not hitting it as much? And he decided the area directly opposite the ribbon that's holding the bauble in place, and diagonally opposite-ish the frog. But I did want a light source coming from underneath as well, which you can see in the finished painting is coming up from the bottom right hand corner. But doing this bauble, creating this bauble in pastel, did allow me just to experiment, and it was really enjoyable. Enjoy a bubble. Oh no, cracker jokes are coming out. Okay, so blending stump. This time a thicker, more robust blending stump because I've got a lot of work to do and not too many intricate areas to go into. And that is how dark layer 1 went. Hence I did 4 layers just to build up the intensity. I was going on light-handed because I didn't really need to concentrate and map out where I was going. So this was layer 3, I think. So again, I've gone over tiny little circles, building up the pigment, and it is always best to have too much, not enough than too much. You can always add more, but if you go on really heavy-handed right at the beginning and realise you've got the wrong colour in the wrong place, you've used up a lot of tooth of the paper that you've then got to try and go over. And if you're working on a paper that doesn't like taking a lot of layers, you might be struggling then. So always work light-handed, and you can always add more, but it's harder to take pastel away. You can lift some out with a putty rubber if you've got an area where you think you've added too much pigment. But if it's a colour in the wrong place, sometimes it can stain the paper slightly, depending on which pigments you're working with and depending on what paper, what surface you're working on. So keep it in mind. If in doubt, grab a spare piece of paper and have a play on that before going on and trying something completely new on your project. Yep, so that was layer 3. You can see the pigments really building up now, and that was layer 4. Phew. Okay, so as with at the very beginning of this video. I now went on with the darkest green and mapped out where I wanted these fir branches, twigs, stems to go. And once happy with that, start going over with lighter colours. So this is a Carbothello green, and because I've blended the colours of the bauble right into the tooth of the paper, I'm able to then just go on and start adding layers for the fir tree needles. Not a problem. I just can't say how wonderful, you know, this paper is. It does exactly what I want it to do. I know some artists have been having problems with manufacture lines, like tiny lines running through the paper. I've had that issue a couple of times, but it's not been noticeable on the finished project. I've been able to work through it. So yeah, it's just one of those things. But if it was something that was appearing on every piece of paper I was ordering, and I order the really large sheets and cut them down myself, then those sheets would be sent back and I would ask them to replace them for me. If you're buying from a reputable dealer, they'd be more than happy to do that. I buy all my Clairefontaine pastel mat through Jackson's art supplies here in the UK. And there he is, finished at last for the final reveal. So it is a project I really enjoyed. I do wish you all a very Merry Christmas if you celebrate Christmas, and a happy and peaceful but prosperous New Year. Thank you for everybody who's supported me this year on my YouTube channel. Thank you for the likes and subscribes and comments, and for sharing my videos with your family and friends. That's truly appreciated. And yeah, let's hope that the next year brings even more creative lovelies our way. So here we go, the last piece coming off, and all that's left is that I will sign him and then pop him either in a frame or a file to keep safe. So there he is, little red-eyed tree frog on a bauble. Merry Christmas everybody, and take care. Bye for now. Hi there my friends, welcome back to my channel. I've taped a piece of £140 watercolour paper down to a board, masked out the area for the bird and the branch with masking film, and now I'm just coating the background with some clean water. So hopefully no strokes will appear, or brush strokes will appear in the background. So I'm working quite quickly, just getting a load of Inktense down, 2 different shades of blue from 2 blocks, Inktense blocks. And for those of you that don't know what Inktense is, it's a water-soluble ink produced by Derwent. So just making sure there's a good amount, working quickly, and then applying a little piece of cling film over the top. Now it's always best to cut your cling film before you need it, and make sure it's bigger than the sheet of paper that you're going to apply it to, because as you can see I'm creating wrinkles, and the wrinkles will take up more of the cling film, if that makes sense. So you can mess around with this for a few minutes. I did stand up to do this. And then once you're happy with the direction that the wrinkles are travelling in, you need to let this dry naturally. So I let it dry overnight. If you lift it off too early, then the effect isn't the same. The effect will be dulled. And as you can see in the background, it worked really well. I didn't have to mess with the background at all. Once it was done with the cling film and dried, it was good to go. So moving on to the Northern Cardinal. Oh, it's a bird I wish we had over here in the UK, but we don't. It's an American bird. So first of all, I went over the area that I wanted to paint with the Inktense with water again, so that the colours would move about and I wouldn't have any hard lines where it was staining the paper too quickly. So just going on, and now I'm working with the Inktense pans. It's the same product, just in a different format. So for those of you that are new to Inktense, as I said earlier, it is a water-soluble ink made by Derwent. It comes in a variety of forms. It comes in the pans like this. This is a 12-pan box. You can get a 24-pan box. You can buy the pans individually. It also comes in blocks, and it also comes in pencil form as well. And all are sold open stock, which means you can buy one colour, two colours, or a handful of colours, or you can buy the sets. So just working nice and gradually, building up a scruffy base layer. And yes, all paintings have an ugly stage, and this is definitely proof that the painting does start out looking a bit like I've painted it with my left hand. So just applying some darks and just letting the inks do what they want to do at the moment, and just teasing them around different areas. All quite self-explanatory as you're watching this. Now if I go on to an area where I've applied ink already with a damp brush, it will lift it only while it's still wet. As it begins to dry, it becomes more and more permanent. And they are staining colours. I don't think any of them don't stain paper, which means once they're completely dried, they are a little bit harder to lift. And you'll see later on in the video, I use a scrubber brush to lift a few stubborn areas. It will never take you back to the white of the paper because it's stained, but you can lift a little bit of colour with a scrubbing brush. So just working in around delicate areas, taking my time, and remembering and keeping in mind this is just the first layer of quite a few layers. I've never painted a cardinal before, and I just thought with winter approaching, this would make a nice subject for, yeah, cuddling up with a big mug of coffee and just painting something cold looking but cozy too. So nice contrast in the finished paintings between the cool areas of the background and the warmth of the bird, and enough contrast as well between darks and lights, which was nice. I really enjoyed this piece. So going on now, if you see me working on a fresh layer, it's normally when I've completely dried the surface with a hairdryer, but up to now I haven't got the hairdryer out, so everything's going wet on wet pretty much. And obviously the type of paper you use for your painting will determine how fast or how slow your paints dry as well. So hot press watercolour paper, I've found that the Inktense paints dry a little faster than when used on cold press. And this paper that I'm using is a cold press paper. I believe it's the Bockingford, but I'll list everything in the description below. If you can see down the edges of the branch, there is a slight hint of blue, and that's just where a little bit of the watered down colour seeped underneath the masking film, but not a problem. When worked in plenty of layers, these paints, although they look quite transparent, they can cover up a multitude of errors. So that's the sort of first coat on to the bird itself. Now I haven't dried anything with a hairdryer just yet, and it is allowing me just to lift off a little bit of the darker pigment with a damp clean brush, and then I'm just wiping off with a tissue as needs be. So I use a variety of brushes in this painting. Obviously you saw the big flat brush at the beginning to apply the water, and then the Derwent blocks for the background, and then slowly coming in and using smaller brushes. You can use your watercolour brushes with the Inktense, you can use acrylic brushes with the Inktense, anything really. Sorry if I've gone out of frame a little bit there. Just darkening up the stomach area of the bird. Just putting a little bit of a shadow in where the branch is. but I'll be back in a minute. Gives you a good look at those base coat layers. Okay, here we go. And it is nice when you're working with your base coat areas to think, where do I want the more saturated areas of the bird? Where do I want things to look more glowy and warm? So the tummy area and the chest area, by putting that yellow and orange undercoat in to begin with, anything I put on top of it, as long as it's thinly applied, a light layer, you can still get that warmth and the glow coming through the layers on top. So just taking my time now, looking at my reference image. Obviously when I put the base coat colour on for the head of the bird, I completely covered up the darker area, this black area, and that's fine because I knew that the black would be able to cover it up, the darker area. And the colour I'm using at the minute, I've mixed the reds we've been using, I've taken some of the blue from the background, I'm using that in this mixture, and some purple as well, and you can really see the purple coming through. So black is a colour that is available in the Inktense range. It's in the 12 pan as well as the 24 pan set, as well as the blocks and pencils. But if you apply black on its own, it can look very flat. So I try to stay clear of using black if possible. And just at a push, I might use it in tiny areas. But I prefer to mix a dark with the colours that I'm already using on a painting and that are already on my palette. And working up in many layers, you can create more depth in a colour than just using black on its own. And the same goes with white as well. If you're using white in any painting, Inktense included, then less is more. Leave it till the very last thing you apply, and then hopefully you won't apply too much. So just rushing through now, getting a base coat on that beak, and all I'm interested in now is covering up the white of the paper. And still this little chappie is in an ugly stage. Now what I was very careful with when working this Cardinal was not to overlap any areas of the background, especially with the yellow, because obviously yellow over the blue of the background and you'd be creating a green tone. So just being careful around the edges. I do tidy up the edges in a bit, just by using a more concentrated wash of pigment. So hence more pigment, less water. If you want a colour to look darker, then use more pigment, less water. If you want to use a pigment but make it look lighter, then just add more water to it. I don't really think you can add too much water to Inktense. They pretty much work however you want to use them. But their transparent qualities are beautiful, and their colour is so saturated, the pigments are so saturated, they're wonderful. So I'm just tidying up that edge, and what I've done, I've taken the white out of the block set. And just to make things clear, I am a Derwent ambassador, so all the products have been sent to me to use and to review and to make videos for Derwent, but they are fantastic. It doesn't alter my view of them at all. They're just one of those things. I get sent them, I get to work with them, and but I will always give you my honest opinion. So what I've done, taken the white block out of the Inktense block set, mixed it to a very thick consistency on the palette, and then just tidying around those edges. And as it dries, you can tint it. So just because I'm working with white doesn't mean to say it has to stay white. You can glaze over these Inktense inks with other colours, and as long as the foundation layer, the base coat layer, is dry, then you can alter its hue lots and lots of times. So just dabbing the brush off there and doing a little bit more lifting just before everything completely dries. As I said, you won't be able to take it back to the white of the paper. You'll see that later on the tail when I do quite a bit of lifting of pigment on the tail. Even though it's been painted onto a white piece of paper, the paper remains stained underneath the layers. If you want more movement with your paints, then remember, go wet on wet. If you want less movement of the paint as you apply it, then go wet on dry. And somebody did ask me about whether I frame my Inktense paintings. Yes, I do. So I just treat them as though they're watercolours. They go behind glass. So I mat them with acid-free matte and then put them behind glass if you're more wary, because the light fast ratings on these are fantastic when they're dry, but once water is added, the light fast properties are a little bit questionable. So if in that case you want to put them behind glass and display them in your home, then you could try putting them behind UV resistant glass instead of just a normal framer's glass. I've been painting with Inktense for years, and I've got many of the paintings hanging around my home, and I've never had a problem with anything fading. I've sold paintings created with Inktense, but I have advised the client that they may not last for a long time. They've kept me regularly updated every sort of 6 months or so. Nothing's faded, but I do advise people, if you with any painting in any medium, never hang in direct sunlight, keep away from radiators and things like that. And yeah, I've not had a problem with the light fast, but I don't want to say there might never be a problem with the light fast. And Derwent has said the light fast properties are good when dry, when the medium is dry, but once water's added, and let's face it, all artists are going to be adding different quantities of water, different ratios, so it's really difficult for Derwent to then say how well the light fast qualities are going to last with these products. Obviously, the more you thin down a product, and that goes with watercolours as well, the light fast is questionable because the pigments are further spread out and more open to the elements. So working wet on dry now, so I've dried off that initial base coat layer, and I'm just adding a little bit more pigment to the surface, keeping in mind the direction that the feathers would be growing on this bird. And he is a little bit fluffed up, he's probably feeling cold with all that icy background, so a little bit fluffed up. But these have a tendency to blend almost when you put them on the paper. They do spread out slightly. You can get really fine details, as you can see with the feather details next to the branch on the left, but they do, it's really hard to describe unless you're working with them, that they have a softness about them. They do tend to blend very well with the colour that's underneath, even when applied wet on dry. To get round that, if you don't want such a soft effect and you want more harsh, definite lines, then definitely increase your pigment to water ratio. More pigment and your lines will be more noticeable, more prominent, because as the water seeps into the paper, it's taking the pigment with it and it just settles into the paper as opposed to drying on top of the paper. I think that's how this soft effect happens. I might be wrong. I'm not a scientist. I get paid to create, not to work with test tubes and things, although I feel that could be fun. So working just down the side of the bird now, and hopefully I've kept everything else in frame. Hope you're all keeping well. Can't believe we're in November already, and everywhere you go now Christmas things are out and Christmas music is playing, and yeah, it's cozy season, isn't it? It's lovely. Do love it. So just altering the hue of the colour I'm applying, so I've gone a little bit more orangey now. So still working with the original red and just adding a touch of yellow, the warmer yellow out of the 12 pan set. And apart from the white that I mixed to tidy up the edges, the rest of the bird is created just with that 12 pan set. So just softening the area now, the transition from the warmer tones of the chest of the bird moving down towards the branch where the shadowed area of the bird is going to be, and just softening that transition slightly, just so it's not a huge step from one area to another. Now I've used the red of the pan set and mixed in a little bit of the purple from the pan set just to make this darker tone going under here. Now really watered down pigment just to get this first base coat layer, and because it's such a small area I didn't wet this area first, I'm just going wet on to dry. So the only reason I wetted the bird area first was because it's such a big area to start putting pigment on, and you don't want to take too long in one area, come back to the initial area and it already be dry, because you might have some stubborn marks, brush marks on there that would be difficult to alter or remove. So small areas wet on dry, big areas wet on wet. And obviously it goes with the speed of your painting. If you're very fast at painting, you might get away with working wet on dry all the time. If you're a slower, more meticulous painter, then it might be worth popping a little bit of clean water onto an area first. Even if you let it dry slightly, let the water settle into the paper a little bit, and then apply the paint on top. Always best to test things out on a spare piece of paper if you can, before applying them to your project. You can see here all the lovely shapes in the background created by the cling film. And the cling film, if you're environmentally minded, you can stretch it out on a board, get a damp cloth or a damp sponge, clean the cling film, dry it with a piece of paper towel or let it dry naturally, and then you can keep using it, because the Inktense did wipe off the cling film and left the cling film really clean and ready to go again. The masking film that I used to mask out the bird and the branch initially is by Frisket, and unfortunately once you've used it once, you could probably get away with using it twice at a push, but it loses its adhesiveness on the back after one use of it. You lose quite a bit of the adhesiveness. 2 uses of it and the adhesive qualities on the back of it have gone completely. And onto the tail. So this was really quick compared to the body of the bird. I'd made a fresh coffee and I just wanted to get colour onto that tail, and I just went about it really roughly, to be honest, because as I said earlier, you can glaze, you can alter colours with additional layers of transparent colour. So I just wanted to get the main darks in, the main shapes in, and then I would let glazing do the rest of the work. So at this point I wasn't worried about the colours that I was applying. as long as they were roughly in the right area of colour, then I just went with it. And this is speeded up, but honest, this tail was so quick to do because I knew I didn't want to add any detail or anything like that. I want the focus to be definitely on the face of the Cardinal itself. I had to keep in mind that I wanted the light to look like it was shining through the tail feathers. So tail feathers within the middle of the tail would be overlapped more than on the edges, and so hence that's why I was making some areas darker and leaving some areas a little lighter. There you can see that the colour really didn't matter at this point. I just wanted to cover the white of the paper. And then start applying washes of different colours just so I could get the hue of the tail overall the right colour. Keeping my strokes going in the direction of the feathers themselves, just in case there was a brush mark there that I couldn't lift or alter, then it would look like it was travelling in the correct direction anyway, and it would look natural and not a mistake. And there I am going on with the glaze, and between popping this glaze on and the previous portion of base coat layers, I did dry it off with a hairdryer, so I'm now going wet on to dry. And another glaze, so I've dried the tail off again and going on with the third glaze, or it might even be the fourth glaze now. And it just pulls everything together. Now this is a scrubber brush, so everything's completely dry, and all I'm doing is I dip it into some clean water and then very carefully just lifting a little bit of the pigment out where I want the highlight to be. So I'll never get back to the white of the paper because the pigment is stained, but it gives me a natural highlight. So very few things in nature are white, and if I'd have gone on this with the white block, it would have looked very unnatural, but just by going in and lifting a little bit of the pigment, it really does a good job. And this brush, I believe, is called an Eradicator, and you can get them in different sizes. They're by Rosemary & Co, a UK company, and I'll link everything in the description. Now with an Eradicator brush, you are removing pigment, but you are also disturbing the tooth of the paper as well. So if you are going to do anything like this, be careful not to overdo it because it will damage the surface of the paper. Sorry my hand's in the way, but I'm doing exactly the same thing, just lifting very slightly some of the pigment. And just softening the edge there as well. So again, clean water and dabbing it off with a clean tissue, and just make sure that you're turning the tissue around in your hand each time and that you don't accidentally try to blot with a piece of dirty tissue that already has pigment on it, because you will just place that pigment that you've previously removed back onto your painting. Some areas might need going over a couple of times like this, and some areas just once. But slow and steady, don't overdo it. Just because you've found a new technique, don't think you have to use it everywhere, because it sort of ruins the effect then. And if you're using this method of lifting, make sure you've dried everything off completely first, else you'll have water stains. If you go on with a wet brush, it's likely to leak out into wetted areas. Whereas if you've already dried everything off and then you put the Eradicator brush down, it's just going to dispense water just in that area and nowhere else. If in doubt, step back or go and make a coffee, come back, have another look at your painting. Because when you've sat in front of a painting for so long, you can lose sight of what you're actually trying to achieve. Different ways of seeing your painting afresh is I often take photographs on my phone of my painting in stages, just so I can have a quick look to see if anything's off. Things like proportions and things like that should be picked up in the drawing stage of a painting. If you notice a mistake, please don't leave it until you're adding paint to alter it, because the further into the process you go, things like composition and shapes and sizes are so much harder to alter once you've started adding paint and you're further into your painting. Try and tick these off a checklist, with your initial drawing before going any further, because graphite is so easy to erase, paint not so much. So the branch, quick and easy. I didn't want anything to distract from the bird itself, but I wanted the branch to be in keeping with the background. So I used one of the blues from the background and a Payne's grey from the block set, mixed them on the palette and added a tiny touch of purple, the purple that I used on the black facial markings of the bird, and then just applied them to wet paper. So as you saw me, I went along the branch first with clean water and then just popped pigment in very loosely and just let it do its own thing. Then a little bit of lifting to create some markings on the branch. Now just mixing up a very light wash and getting those toes and the bird's nails in, and just taking my time now. I knew I was nearing the end of this painting, so I probably went and made another coffee, slowed down, deep breaths and relaxing. And some people get really nervous about coming towards the end of a painting because of making a mistake. I mean, you've done all of this work, and now is the moment of truth as you do the finishing touches as to whether it's all going to work and come together. But just take your time. It's only a painting, and you, especially beginners, just tell yourself it's only a painting. You can do it again, maybe not on the same day, maybe another day, or just take what you've learnt and to your next painting. But it's only a piece of paper with paint on it. So working nice and gradually, looking at my reference image now, and just applying the lightest of strokes. And just working with one colour, one very one very watered down colour at the moment. Just to get the form of those toes and claws in. And what I did there was added a little bit of the background blue just around the toes on the right hand side, because the background hadn't gone right up to the toes, so I needed to add that in. Now I've mixed up the same colour but more pigment and less water, and it's created this darker, thicker tone of colour. And just add in the shadows. So the white of the paper is your highlight. The next layer of paint on the toes and nails would be your mid-tone, and then these is the darker shadow areas. And you don't need to use tiny brushes for tiny details. This is quite a big brush. I think it's a number 6, but it comes to a very fine point, which means I can load the body of the brush up, the belly of the brush where the bristles are quite wide, load it up with a lot of pigment, and it'll keep feeding that very fine tip for as long as I want it to, well, until it runs out of water and pigment. Just adding a little bit of red there and coming down to that toe and then filling in the gap there. And a few feathery details. I hope you're all keeping well, and thank you for joining me today on this painting, and I hope you give this new tutorial with the cling film a go. It really is an enjoyable process. It's very random, it's hard to plan that background. You can get a rough idea when you apply the cling film in which direction the lines will appear on the dried paper, but be patient. It may take a couple of goes for you to feel more confident with this technique, but it really is a wonderful technique to use if you're not too concerned about the outcome. So just adding a little bit of reflection there on the branch and shadows onto the branch of where his toes are. What I haven't included in the painting, or in the video, sorry, is I mixed up some of the Derwent white and just applied a little bit to the branch right at the very end of the painting, just to depict an icy, frosty feel to it. But you'll see that on the finished painting. And don't forget your toe shadows. I nearly forgot them, I must admit. And they do make a big difference, don't they? Looks like those toes are actually sitting on the branch. And there you have it. Cardinal, frosty background, Derwent Inktense. Thanks everybody for watching. Appreciate you all. Please leave a comment if you have any questions, and I will see you all soon. Bye for now. Bye. Hi there my friends, welcome back to my channel. I just want to say I'm sorry if my voice is a little croaky today. It's not the microphone, I'm just getting over a cold virus, so please bear with me. So I don't know about you, but I hate wasting art materials, and when I opened my little Stay Wet palette, I was surprised to find that these acrylic gouache paints were still wet after a couple of weeks being boxed away. So I decided I'd just create a little project for you with them. So I took a piece of scrap watercolour paper. I don't know the brand because it was in my scrap drawer. I do know that it's £140 in weight with a rough textured surface. So taped it down to a board, wet it all over, and then began to apply the paint wet into wet. I'm using golden Taklon brushes, a little set that I got from B&M for, I believe it was 10 brushes for £4.99. I'll link them in the description below, as well as the Stay Wet palette. So just getting a feel for the paints again. When I used them a couple of weeks ago to do the 4 little bookmarks, that is on my YouTube channel, and that's the first time I'd used these paints. Really happy with them. They dry really quick and they're quite opaque. So just going on there, just getting a little bit of texture into the background before I sketch on the pine cone. Just going backwards and forwards, making some marks, and because the paper is still wet, the marks bleed out slightly, so gives you a nice soft effect. So using the brush, this is a flat brush I'm using at the minute, and just holding it so only the very tips of the fibres touch the paper. So you just go backwards and forwards. Real fun. Okay, so I'd got a rough background in, then went on and sketched in the pine cone. You can just about see it, and then began by adding some darker pigment strokes to the background, coming forward as it were. So from the background moving forward towards the sketch that I'd put in. By now the paper's completely dry, so I did dry it with a hairdryer before I putting those pine needles in at the back. And when working on dry paper, I know that the edges of the brush strokes are going to be much cleaner, much neater. But you can go backwards and forwards. Obviously this is acrylic gouache, so if I put water on top of what I've already painted, nothing's going to shift. So if I did want to make the background needles a little bit softer looking, I could go on with water first, then apply the paint on top. So just moving through the painting now, moving from the background to the foreground, so working the pine needles from the back to the front, and just putting a little bit of a darker tone in there. And it's just so I don't lose where each of those pine needles are going to be. Now at the moment there's not a lot of definition and obviously not a lot of contrast, but that's going to be built up gradually. And sorry for not keeping the board still, but we do what we have to. Going in with the lights now and just defining the edges. And where I've gone over with the light colours, I'm just glazing a yellowish green on top of that just to soften it back down. Obviously once it's dry I can go backwards and forwards, adding highlights, glazing them if I need to, until I build up the intensity of colour or the amount of contrast that I'm after. I just had a coughing fit, so thank goodness this microphone's got a mute button. So I'm not using black at all during the process of this painting, just using the colours that I've got on the palette. I did add 2 little drops of red, a warmish red and a cool red, and a little dropper of yellow as well. Now going in and defining some of the twig that the actual cone is growing on. So also this is beginning to add contrast, which is lovely. So you want more contrast towards the front of the painting, nearer to the viewer, less contrast as you go backwards into the midground and then background. Working further down onto the cone now and allowing some of the background colour to peek through. And there isn't going to be a lot of talking because I keep having coughing fits and having to press the mute button. But it's all very self-explanatory. So as I said earlier, I'm not going to be using black. So I mixed up a nice dark tone using the dark green, the purple, a little bit of the red and the yellow. And that's the red nearest to the green, the cool red. And by using a limited palette like this, it just unifies the whole painting instead of bringing in extra colours. I've already decided that the light is going to be coming in from the right hand side, so I'm going to make the tones on the left hand side cooler and the tones on the right hand side warmer. When painting anything like this from nature, it's ideal to keep in mind that you're not painting a pine cone, you're painting abstract shapes. Just makes it easier to pick out the details, or your mind will take over and think it knows what a pine cone looks like when actually it doesn't. So just look at your reference image if you're using one, or your materials that are in front of you. Maybe you've got a flower in front of you, or a pine cone, or a leaf, and just look for the abstract shapes. And I'm putting the darks in first, then the medium tones, and then the lights in at the end. Just let me know if you like seeing the palette on screen, or would you rather me be zoomed in more on the actual project itself. This is something, yeah, I want to play around with and see. If you do like seeing the palette, I might start recording the actual palette with a separate camera and then just drop it down into the corner and zoom in on the project a little more. But if you let me know what you like, and then I will go with the majority. Just adding a few warmer tones to this side. I wasn't sure if I was going to do that or not. As I said earlier, I was going to keep the left hand side to cool tones, but just looking at reference and some cones I had in front of me, they do catch the light in unusual ways. So I thought I'd add a few warm tones along the bottom half on the left hand side, and if I didn't like it, I could alter it, you know, and make it cooler again. So just building up the intensity of the contrast. If you're going to go with anything in a painting and push it a little bit, then contrast is the way to go. Now adding some lights to the right hand side where the pine cone would be catching the light. If I go on too light, I can always glaze over it with a thinned down version of a different colour once it's dry. So engrossed in this little painting that I hadn't even realised the sun had started to come through the window and shine on the project. But I do pull the blind down in a minute so it doesn't affect the video too much. Now just applying some of the white gouache with the cotton wool bud. These are paper cotton wool buds, so no plastic or anything like that. The whole thing is made from cotton and a paper stem, so environmentally friendly. And I do reuse them. That will just be kept to one side now and be used for something else. But I do prefer just starting this off with a cotton wool bud, and it stops me from fiddling too much. If I go on and start applying it with a brush, I tend to fiddle and it doesn't look so natural. But by applying little blobs of paint and moving them around the surface of the paper just with the cotton wool bud, I just think it adds a little bit more realism. And obviously no paintbrush marks in the paint either. And now mixing up a thinned down version of the white, so I can just tap on a little bit of texture. So snow flurries or things like that that obviously we're all going to be getting at some point during the latter part of the year or the beginning of next year. And yeah, this would make a nice little greeting card for Christmas or something like that. So just nice to have a play with a small project and use up your art materials in the process. Now by now I was realising that the top of the painting wasn't dark enough, and once everything was dry I do go on and start darkening that, and you'll see that in a minute. So wetting the surface of the paper and then just going on, and because I've wet that part of the paper with clean water, I know that any brush marks I put on now are going to be ones that have soft edges, so I don't want anything too drastic up there. I just know that I need to darken the top of the painting and add in a little bit more texture at the same time. Sorry about my hand being in the way, but I'm trying to use the very tip of the brush. I don't want any wide brush strokes, and that's just, yeah, an easy way of controlling your brushes, just by having it vertical and just using the very tip. Any wider brush strokes may have been too obvious in the finished painting, so just trying to keep just the tip of the brush on the paper. And you could do this with a flat brush or a filbert. I just had that round to hand, and then just adding in some of this snowdrops, that's a flower, snowflakes, and adding a little bit more white texture in. And even though this is acrylic gouache, it did clean off the work surfaces really easy just with a wet paper towel. Now working on dry paper, so I dried everything off with a hairdryer, then using a very watery mix again, started going on and adding a little bit more texture, and because the paper is now dry, the edges of the brush marks are going to be a lot cleaner, less fuzzy, so as though these pine needles that I'm putting on now are closer to the viewer than the diffused ones in the background. Okay, so everything's dry now, and I'm going to be going on with 4 pens, and they are Pentel Energel Liquid Gel Ink. I'm reading it off the pen. They're 0.7 millimeters, and it's a ball tip. They're brilliant. They're just coloured liquid gel from Pentel, and it's nice just to add a little bit of detail towards the end that I didn't add with the paints. Yeah, I'm finding it really difficult to get my words out today, so sorry that there's not been a lot of audio input from me today, but I'm sure you didn't want me to be coughing all the way through this half-hour video. So I used a brown, a yellow, orange and green just to finish it off. I don't know if they're water soluble or not, I haven't tried, so yeah, if in doubt, try on a scrap piece of paper first, and that goes with all art mediums. If you're unsure about how to use an art medium or where to use it or anything like that, just try it on a scrap piece of paper, see if it reacts with water. If it doesn't, see if you can erase things or if you can't, and it just gives you a little bit of added security, I guess, instead of jumping straight in with a new medium onto an existing project. But this was just a little bit of a playtime. I think the whole painting took an hour and a half. Yeah, and it was really enjoyable. Had plenty of coffee on the go and throat lozenges. And yeah, had a lovely time. Thank you if you've made it through to the end. I really appreciate you all. Please hit like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you all soon, hopefully with a throat that's back to normal. Take care, and bye bye for now. Bye bye.